A sermon for Passion Sunday. Good morning. On this Passion Sunday, as the Church bids us to reflect on the suffering of Christ in the days leading up to Holy Week, let's further explore what lies at the heart of Christian theology by reference to the painting in the church tower, which is a copy of Van Dyck's Christ Bearing His Cross, the original of which hangs in a medieval church in Antwerp. A little more than 800 years ago, the Dominican monastic order of preachers was founded in Spain, and in 1276 they went to Antwerp, now in Belgium, and built St. Paul's Church, which we can see here, near the River Scheldt. 300 years later, following the Reformation, in 1585, they built a larger church with elevated floor to avoid river flooding, and created what we can see as an imposing late Gothic-style church, which would later contain a Baroque interior, giving expression to the Roman Catholic resurgent push of the Counter-Reformation. While back home, Queen Elizabeth I manoeuvred to retain her throne, the all-powerful Spanish rulers, who'd sacked Antwerp twice, cut off all trade with England and prepared to invade our shores from their base in Flanders. Just a decade after all that turmoil, Anthony van Dyck was born. His father, a cloth merchant whose rich customers were among his first patrons. This goes some way to explain Van Dyck's later recognised skill of painting exquisite clothes with such detail. We see this in his painting, the famous painting of King Charles I on horseback, dominating the dining room of Highclere Castle of Downton Abbey fame. The Van Dyck family was devout Catholic, and Anthony became a pupil of the great Flemish artist Peter Rubens, who claimed he was the best of my pupils. He absorbed his teacher's techniques and preference for the grand scale, while already developing his own distinctive style from quite an early age. It was when he was just 17 years old, in 1617, that St. Paul's Church in Antwerp commissioned 11 leading local artists to paint a series of 15 masterpieces to adorn the entire length of the North Aisle. And at that young age, Van Dyck was one of them, his first public commission. In such high esteem was he held that Van Dyck received the same fee as did Rubens for his work. The painting we can see and have here in our tower is a copy of this original. Painted precisely by whom we cannot say, but possibly by another of Rubens' pupils. Our copy has hung here since at least 1792, though no records reveal when or by whom it was presumably given. Originally it hung on the north wall of the nave, but once the arcades were opened up to build the North Aisle in the Victorian era, it moved to its present position, the only available large wall in the tower, which over the centuries atmospheric conditions have done it no favours. Once the Counter-Reformation was well underway, the Dominicans used their artistic patronage to give expression to their interpretation of the Christian faith in a truly impressive way. In an age when theological debate made holding certain beliefs sometimes a matter of life and death, not just the occasion of changing where you worshipped, the battle between the sense of good and evil was as polarised as ever it would be. And in this spiritual battle, having a ready and accessible armoury of prayer at your disposal, was essential. And so the series of 15 paintings were commissioned as a visual aid to teach about the dramatic events of Christ's life of salvation and how his mother Mary witnessed so many of them. The paintings depict 13 mysteries in the life of Christ himself, and a further 2 of his mother Mary, as taught by Roman Catholicism. I trust that whether you accept the doctrines of the last 2, namely the Assumption and Coronation of the Virgin Mary, or not, you will accept the preceding 13 biblical mysteries, all being at the heart of Christian theology for all Christians, and worthy of our serious attention. These paintings were an aid to praying the Rosary. Its practice, repeating a series of prayers and chants, has tended to promote itself as primarily a devotion to Mary herself. But the intended purpose of repeated chants was designed to free one's mind from thinking about the actual words of the prayers, and instead to ponder, gazing on art, to assist and enter into the divine mysteries of which there are 15 depicted. For those mathematically minded, saying 10 Hail Marys for each of the 15 mysteries brought you to the total number of the Psalms, all of which, in the old monastic tradition, were recited every week. The mysteries were divided into 3 sections: joyful, sorrowful, and glorious. And the colour pigments in the paintings reflect these different moods. Van Dyck's offering is, of course, among the sorrowful. Just before the crucifixion, after which the series moves to the brighter, glorious section, beginning with the resurrection. They were conceived to be pondered, slowly and prayerfully walking along the north aisle, from the west towards the east. The first depicts Jesus' infancy, starting with the announcement of Gabriel to Mary that she would give birth. The Annunciation. Then the visitation of Mary to Elizabeth. The Nativity, particularly beautiful, and then his presentation in the temple, and as a young boy teaching there on the occasion when he became separated from his parents on their way home. The 5 sorrowful mysteries begin with the events of Maundy Thursday, Christ's time of agonizing prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane. Next is the painting by Rubens of the scourging of Christ by his tormentors, the vicious energy of the arms that lash him, powerfully conveyed by Rubens' treatment of the subject. Followed by the humiliation of the crowning with thorns, and the mocking jeers of his accusers. Then, at number 9, we come to Van Dyck's depiction of Christ bearing his cross, on the way to his crucifixion. Some of these paintings in the series are also subjects of what would become later part of the 14 Stations of the Cross, which was a later devotion not then in vogue, and which focused on the last day of Jesus' life on earth. Van Dyck's artwork shows the might of soldiers bearing down upon him, the detail of a centurion's face, Jesus fallen under the weight of his cross, and Simon of Cyrene's assistance. But the main thrust, underneath the overwhelming weight of it all, is the anguish of Jesus and the tears which roll down his face, as he glances back over his right shoulder to see his grieving mother. Our tower copy has deteriorated over the years, not least to earlier damp rising up the wall, which Building and Works has now corrected with a correct, proper breathable plaster, and ensuring the painting does not actually touch the wall at all. With the aid of just natural daylight only, as it was in its deteriorated state, in our copy you could hardly make out that Jesus was in the picture at all, let alone see any of the detail. And even when looking up at the original in Antwerp, given the base of the painting stands about 15 feet above the floor, you also can't see much of the detail. But I'll return to that in a minute, but first want to complete the journey through the series. In the 10th painting of the crucifixion itself, Jesus and his mother's gaze do not meet. Christ's head is tilted to his left, and Mary is on the right. He is painted alone and seems beyond human solace. Then the brighter palette of colour depicts the glorious resurrection, the ascension and the descent of the Holy Spirit at Whitsun, and concludes, as mentioned, with Mary's Assumption and her crowning. One gets an interesting sense of the whole composition from a high gallery above, which I had the pleasure of seeing from the organ loft when I visited Antwerp a few years ago. There, incidentally, the mighty pipe organ sits in its Baroque splendour, built in 1654 enjoying 3 rebuilds since. Admittedly very heavy and clunky to play, but producing a resounding mix of sounds and a glorious 5-second reverberation. But getting back to the painting, one can see that the frame of the Van Dyck painting, its original in Antwerp, is about 5 centimetres shorter than all the rest, which suggests it was perhaps relocated into an altarpiece in St. Paul's, then replaced into its original location. Whether a copy was ever made to hang in the series while the original adorned the altar, no one's able to say. But perhaps if someone did, that is perhaps how a copy ended up here at St. Mary's Merton. Who knows? None of the paintings has left St. Paul's, with 2 notable exceptions. The first was when all of them were forcibly transported to Paris under the 1794 French revolutionary regime. Incidentally, just 2 years after, the earliest records show our copy here at St. Mary's. And they were only returned in 1816 following Napoleon's defeat at the Battle of Waterloo. Naturally, they are all now heavily guarded, the Church keen not to lose them again. The authorities at St. Paul's considered a request to lend the Van Dyck for an exhibition at the Prado Museum in Madrid some years ago. They did agree, under strict conditions, and off it went and back again. This occasion afforded Leo, my guide at Antwerp, an opportunity to take close-up photographs while the painting was at floor level. And this is how we can see the detail which captures the essence of the painting, despite the image being my iPad photo of his iPad photo. While the crucifixion draws the gaze of the watcher upwards to the elevated perspective and to the divine meaning of Christ's death for our salvation, Van Dyck's Christ is literally on the ground, and it is the human encounter between a mother and son which captures attention, as you can now see from these close-up photos. First, the centurion. Then Mary. And here, the face of Jesus. The cost of Christ's faithfulness to the Father's will is made vividly clear in the 5 sorrowful mysteries in the series. These profoundly human, but also divinely mysterious events can help the believer to relive the death of Jesus, to stand at the foot of the cross beside Mary, his mother, and enter with her and all the faithful in every age into the depths of God's love for humanity and to experience its life-giving power. When we are all allowed back into the church again, soon we hope, we will be able to see the restored painting, completed a few years ago now, with its spotlight illuminating the painting, now to much greater effect. Here you can see both before and after restoration. Thanks are due to the Building and Works Committee for overseeing this restoration and for the generous donation which enabled it to happen. When you next see it for yourself and ponder closely this enigmatic painting and its sorrowful subject, tormented with shame and spitting, who invites us to confess our part in the sin of the world, which was the cause of his suffering on the way to the crucifixion and ultimate glory of resurrection. This work of art has come to us first through the commission of St. Paul's, Antwerp. From Anthony Van Dyck himself, schooled by Rubens, as well as the anonymous copier, our presumed unknown donor, and our predecessors here at St. Mary's, who resisted the temptation to dispose of it, so darkened as it was with age. As this year's Passiontide begins, and many of us have more time and opportunity to reflect, while we observe the public health message to stay at home, let us hear afresh the words of Christ. Is it nothing to you, all ye who pass by? And let us ask what Christ, in this divine mystery, says to you today. Amen.